Hi, everyone, and welcome to Red Bank's 2023 budget presentation. Along with Councilwoman Trigiano, I'm Council President Michael Ballard. Our Finance Chair and Council Member Angela Morandi is out of the country at the moment, so I will be doing some of the presentation that she would be doing. We also have our CFO, Tom Seaman here, along with our interim borough administrator, Darren McConnell, to help with the presentation. I want to welcome everybody who's online and our small, intimate crowd that are here in person with us. And with that, I'll jump right into the presentation. I ask that all questions be held to the end of the presentation in case we answer whatever questions pop into your head during the course of the presentation. Okay. So the 2023 municipal budget presentation will consist of our budget process, the municipal tax levy, our property tax assessments, the budget revenues, budget appropriations, capital projects, utilities overview, CAP and CAP Bank, which our CFO will go into a little detail about, and at the end, questions and answers. Budget timeline. So you'll notice that our budget timeline for 2023 has been slightly accelerated this year. Our department budgets in 2022 came in January and February. In 2023, they were started a little bit earlier in September or October. And that flowed through to the entire process so that, as you can see, we had the budget introduction on April 26th, as opposed to May 25th, a month earlier. And we're doing this presentation a month and a half earlier. The budget is expected to be adopted on May 31st. Some other budget improvements that we are looking at, but have not fully implemented are long-term budget planning, including strategic plan initiatives and a 6-year infrastructure plan, primarily regarding roads, parks, parking, water, sewer, and buildings. Our department goals to improve customer service initiatives, cost savings and/or revenue generation, and process work efficiencies. We'll also look at a surplus policy, budget objectives, and continue improving the budget schedule. Budget guidelines. For revenues, 2023 anticipated budget revenues cannot exceed prior year realized revenues. And again, our CFO will go into more detail about the state statute that dictates this bullet point. We also analyze prior year's realized revenues and trends to come to the numbers that are in the 2023 budget. Our appropriations by statute, municipality cannot spend more than is budgeted for each appropriations unless there is an emergency. We'll talk about that later. Well, we analyze prior year's page and charge with the current request just to get a run rate from prior years to see if the requests for this year are in line with what we typically spend in budget. We do budget transfers for budget shortcomings around November 1st. It's not until November that we can actually look at budget line by line and see if there's excess in one line that we can move to another line that's underfunded. And every line must be fully funded at the time of adoption. So when we adopt this budget, these will be the revenues, the appropriations for each line. So that's to say, when we appropriate, say for salaries or staffing, we cannot under budget and then add a lot of additional staff during the year, okay? If we're looking to hire, we have to include that in our budget when we do the adoption. Where do your tax dollars go? Of the $55 million tax levy in this year's budget, You can see the breakdown. 27% of it goes to your municipal taxes to support municipal operations. The next largest chunk is local school district taxes. That's local taxes here. The next largest chunk is our regional school tax. And then you can see the county gets a hefty share as well.
And just add, the school and the local and the regional and the county are estimated. We do not have the county's rate. That won't be set till probably June or July. Schools will be coming in soon, but I averaged, I've based it on 2%, which seems to be an average of most of those from the past few years in different towns that I've been in. I've used 2%. It will not hurt us only if it's a little more. And I'll explain later how we deal with a reserve for uncollected taxes. And that would be if that was more and we're not collecting as much, that would affect us a little, but we're covering that with our calculation. We always have a little cushion with that.
Thank you, Tom. How is your tax levy allocated? So the largest percentage of the tax levy comes from residential, which makes sense. Commercial is next. Our apartments, come in third, and smaller chunks from other miscellaneous assessments. Excuse me, tripping up my words. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the nuts and bolts, the technical aspects of our budget, to our CFO, Tom Seaman.
Right. So just on that same trend of the valuations of the town, we see that the residential is increasing by 7.5%, but the overall, the town is increasing by 9%. So for the residents, our overall tax increase, municipal tax increase, is going to be about 2.7%. But with this increase, the residential part will be less than 1%. Now, the whole thing about the assessment demonstration program, some gentleman brought it up the other night. That's where our town gets revalued every year by the assessor. We have 1/5 of the town usually gets inspected every year. I don't know if it's on track. Sometimes with COVID, it might be behind schedule. And then the assessor makes an adjustment for the whole town on everybody's property. And it's usually based on what neighborhood you're in and sales. So if your valuation went up at 7.5%, which is the average of the whole town, your increase will be basically 1% for the municipal portion. Sometimes people go up higher because in your neighborhoods, people are selling the properties higher and those valuations might go up a little higher. We beyond our control. Sometimes it stays flat. And if if you don't increase by 7.5%, your taxes from the municipal portion will be less. And sometimes they even decrease. But that's, it's a formula. It's based on sales. I looked at last year's just for comparison purposes. And last year residential went up 15%. And that was probably because of the COVID, where people were trying to buying a lot in, out of New York or whatever. And those rates were going up. And that created the resident part going up 15%. But this year it just only went up 7%. But last year, the commercial went up only, I think I have the rate here, only less than 1%. And then this year it goes back up because the assessor was considerate of the businesses of during the COVID, probably the rates, the square footages were probably not as more valuable. But this year the assessor corrected that prior year based on what happened with COVID. And the apartment went up 20%. I guess there was 2 new apartment buildings, the Rail, I guess, and the Forum. The assessor I discussed that with yesterday. So that's why that amount went up 20%. But that doesn't hurt us as the residents. It doesn't hurt you as much because the overall rate is increased on an average of 9.37%. Next. So overall, this is the amount that we're raising in taxes, $14,574,000. That's a tax rate of of a tax rate of 0.5. I didn't do that. Stay away from the cursor. So if you look from the 22, the tax rate was 53.53. Now it's lower because of those valuations have gone up, which is, you know, if your valuation stayed the same, then you have a lower tax rate, which is good. On an average house, based on the number of properties in the town, I think it's 3,339 with the valuation. The average residential property is $505,000. The municipal portion of taxes is $2,528. And that's an increase of about $24 from last year. Not too bad. And it's about 1.99% increase. That's pretty good. Jumping into the revenues, we're using a little less surplus from last year, but it's 12%. Our municipal taxes, we have to raise as much as we need for the total budget. So the tax part is 14 million. Local revenues are 4 million, and I'll get into a little more detail. State aid went up a little this year, like $10,000. That fixed rate of the state aid, it's called energy receipts tax. And it's not really an equal proportion, but the state finally has increased that for all the little towns. I know some other towns, it's increased. I think all the towns in Jersey, it's increased, but it's not a lot, but we do get $2 million from the state. We have some grants, and then delinquent taxes, that's lower than last year, but that's based on a higher collection rate. And so we can't anticipate more. So it's not as good that we anticipating less, but it's good that we have a good collection rate. That's important for closing out of the year. Here we are. So here's some of the highlights. Our surplus is down 9%. Local revenues are up 13. I'll go into that a little. State aid went up a slight amount. Grants decreased, but the grants are usually an offset between the revenues and the appropriations. So that's an equal offset. Like I said, the delinquent taxes decreased a little. Library tax increased by 11%. That to this amount here, to the 949,000. That's based on a state calculation. We have no control over that. That's the amount we have to raise. And so the overall municipal tax is, sorry, the cursor's going backwards all the time, is municipal tax is 2.73%. So this is a little small here, but this is detail on the local revenues.
And I'm sorry, Tom, and that 2.73% is the change year over year.
Yes, that's the change of the amount we had last year. We had 14,186,000, I think, from last year.
Thank you.
Just on here. These are changes on revenues. More like in 22, if we receive more than we anticipated, that'll have an excess. We're allowed to anticipate more for the following year. So we anticipated 9,000 for interest on investments. Well, last year it came in at like 300,000. So we increased that by 190,000. That's good for us. The more we increase these revenues, the less we would have to do in raising taxes. Except we don't want to increase it too much, because if you have a bad year and something like the interest rate goes way down, interest rates seem to be going up. So that's good. Not a lot of other major changes. Uniform construction code, we are anticipating 187,000 more than last year, which is, hopefully things are moving more. The construction fees and things like that are coming up. I like to be pretty conservative, not overly make the actual from last year close to what we're anticipating. I like to leave a little, but when you anticipate maybe the next year we'll have more, then you can anticipate more. You just can't anticipate more than you actually realize the prior year.
And
is that understandable? And if anybody has a little question now, I have no problem answering a question now if you want to deal with the current.
And I'd just like to add, and that's why we analyze the revenue trends, just like we analyze appropriation trends, because if there's a hiccup in one year that we got a big bump in revenues that's kind of out of the ordinary,
right,
probably want to strip that out Because
Yeah.
we wouldn't anticipate that again in the coming years, so that we're more level in our revenue projection.
Right, so we were consistently getting $850,000 from the parking utility. It's a very healthy utility. They have extra funds. They support our regular budget with that $850,000. It's very helpful. We have some municipal relief fund. The state gave extra money from COVID, or they called it the ARPA money. And so we have 104,000 extra there. But that might not be, we might not get that again next year. So when you anticipate a revenue, you realize it, and you don't have it next year, then you have to usually make up for it. So that's the negative of that. All right, so here's our surplus outlook. It's going to, looking from the prior years, I'll just go up here. We're using this amount of surplus. We had a balance at the end of the year of 22. We had $5 million, which is meaning our operations are healthy. Our revenues are coming in. We're having not extra revenues, but we're having a good closeout. We closed out with a decent amount, $3,500,000. And we're anticipating a little less. So we're $470,000 less, which we are anticipating for this year. We're using 61%. Some towns use like 2/3. We were using a lot higher in the past. 61% is pretty healthy. The balance of the overall budget to the amount of what we're going to have left is about 8%. That's not bad. Before in our town was a lot less. So that's a good guide. A lot of towns have different guides for how they do the surplus, but does that get understandable? Because it's a little confusing, but our surplus is healthy, but it's not way out of control. Because we could use more surplus to offset taxes. But what we did was we brought up a lot of the revenues tighter to what we were anticipating in the past. So that was a good offset. So we're budgeting pretty well with that. So now into the budget. This is how it's split. Salaries about 40% of our total budget. Libraries, not a big amount. Statutory expenditures, that includes pension, social security, 10% insurance, it's a decent amount. We'll go into a little more detail with that. Let's see here. The salaries went up 2.49%. Usually the contracts for the salaries were about 2.75. So that's consistent. Utilities, we decreased the amount of we're anticipating to spend in the budget. The utility amounts spent in the prior years were a little less than what we anticipated, so we cut that down a little. Solid waste. Sorry. I had a pointer, but it didn't work. My laser pointer did not work on this screen. So our insurances, we cut our insurance down. I analyzed a lot of detail of all the people in the insurance. You want to be a little conservative with that because you have new hires, people get married or families, that increases the cost. So we cut a decent amount on that. The statutory expenditures pension went up 10%. Big chunk of that was our police and fire pension bill. Nothing beyond our control. The state does a calculation. They base it on the number of employees we have, but they also do some back contributions. They have to keep the fund funded. So that went up like through 200,000 or 300,000. So that's most of our increase on the statutory expenditures. That's that. Now going into our debt, this is going to be a little confusing, but we are allowed, based on our valuation of the town, 3.5% of our total valuation of the town, which is, I think, $2.9 billion. So we're allowed up to debt of $92 million. Our debt now is about 14. It's less than, it's like 5 or 6%, or 0.6%. We have had some new issues this year for some other projects that we've already put ordinance out, we're still under 1%. We have a lot of room for debt, not that we're trying to go and accumulate debt because we're allowed to. We're definitely within our guidelines and our requirements of not exceeding our debt limit.
And this is a good number, if you could go back to the debt
Yes.
side, because it allows us the opportunity. We have the bandwidth. If there is a major project that we need to fund through capital, we can do it. And it also spreads out the costs. When you capitalize things, you can spread out that cost, the debt service over many years, instead of putting it in your operating budget, if it's allowable,
Right.
and eating up that cost all in 1 year.
Yeah, so this will show you our debt from last year. We have 3 different funds. We have our general fund, our water sewer, and our parking. Last year was 13 million. This year's a little less. But what happens is you see it's decreasing, but while we're doing more projects, it's going to come back up. But what we try to do is keep it level. The whole key is to levelize it. So our overall, this is just showing what the balances are, what's due. Like this year, we're paying over $3 million of principal and interest payments for our current account. So we're just going to keep that amount similar. So any debt that's added on, our bond counsel would look at the schedule for the next 20 years probably, and they try to levelize that. Is that understandable? If I'm going too fast, somebody slow down because I get going.
He loves this.
I get on a roll. I did this presentation for the mayor in about 5 minutes today, and he was like, whoa, I think his head was spinning. So basically this from the current, our capital, our general capital, some of our capital projects this year, we're looking at South Street road reconstruction, Mechanic Road reconstruction. I think we have some park and recreation projects, right, Chief?
Right, the East Side Park, first of all.
East Side Park, and then the capital improvement program was for the Housing Authority. We just set up an ordinance on that. And then some future projects were the Safe Streets to Transit. Chief, maybe you want to?
That's a grant for Bridge Avenue and Chestnut Street and Bridge Avenue, Dr. James Parker Boulevard for some improvements for pedestrians, bicycles, but more pedestrian safety improvements of those intersections.
Right, and then there's a TAP grant for Shrewsbury Avenue.
That's more pedestrian safety and a little bit of streetscape, but mostly pedestrian safety bump outs and things like that. Hawk signals for a couple of the major crossings.
And the municipal building improvements, there's some definitely needs to improve something in the building here. Next up is our water sewer utility. It's self-liquidating. It's doing fine. Our surplus closeout this year was pretty good. We're using a little more surplus this year. Basically, we increased our surplus because we wanted to increase for capital improvement. There was a need for a generator. And instead of doing long-term debt, you could put some items in your capital improvement funds in your budget, and you could pay it right out without, and some things, bigger projects, you're going to go out to debt. But that was a good project for a generator there. Operating expenses and salaries are up a little, but other expenses were not so much more. The cost of operations, rents were coming in. That's the amount that we realized, so we cannot anticipate more, but it was close. And that's what we anticipated last year. So we had to anticipate a little less, but that's self-liquidating. It balances out appropriations and revenues. And so our big project this year is the lead service line replacement. So I don't know.
So that's through the iBank. We just had a call today with them, actually. We did 2 bond ordinances. We did the first one. They offered us more money at 50% principal forgiveness. So the council did an amended bond ordinance at the last meeting or 2 meetings ago. So we'll be able to replace and also survey and replace additional, all essentially in one census tract that's more or less west of Maple Avenue. Generally, that was based on where the 50% principal forgiveness was being offered, had to meet certain economic requirements for the neighborhood. So put very simply, if it was a more affluent neighborhood, it didn't qualify. So we had to focus on a certain census tract. If the whole town qualified, we could have done it townwide. The whole town did not qualify. So to get any money at all, we had to narrow it down to one census tract.
Yes.
And this accelerates our mandate to replace all our lead service lines. We're under our mandate to replace them all. We saw the opportunity to get more capital or revenue forgiveness for putting the money out. So that's why the second bond ordinance happened.
That project will be, we're estimating it probably around 7 million to do the townwide, maybe a little more than that because prices fluctuate every year. We're not going to do it all this year. This gets us about 2 million done. So roughly almost a third, a little less than a third. And geographically, it's about a third of the town as well.
I saw Nancy's hand up.
I have a question about that. When you're looking to implement this, I know it's, down the line, are you going to go block by block in order to get through as many houses as possible? Newark did this, and you were able to replace all their lead replacement ones in a few days. So I think, we're much smaller in scale and scope, and so I'm thinking at the point look into.
But logistically, that's the plan. We have to stay within the census tract right now because that's where we have the funding. But to make it easier for everybody, the contractor, for our inspectors, we would, in a systematic approach. Now, the issue is we have a certain percentage, and I don't remember what it is, that are identified already as being in need of replacement. So those will be in the sort of the first round. Simultaneously, we'll be test pitting the ones that we are unknown in that census tract. And as we locate those, coordinate where they are, and then almost loop back and do them again. So you might hit the same street twice because it'll be two different crews test pitting as opposed to the ones actually doing the service line replacement.
Can you test fit the street that we're targeting first?
We can, except that they can do we think they can do roughly 5 test pits a day. They can only do 2 service lines a day. So the test pitting crew is going to get ahead of the other crew pretty quickly. So they might start out on the same street, but when you take it 2 months out, they may not be anywhere near each other anymore.
And we have,
That's another question.
I'm sorry, Ben was.
I'm just asking a question about the presentation. So rents, is that the fees that we
Yes.
all pay in the house?
yes, that's what they call it in the budget.
The accounting term is rents.
Yes,
Includes all the downtown and the housing and all that stuff.
all the fees the tax collector receives in that office.
From every service.
All, yep,
Now,
water, sewer.
but as part, I just want to, so is there a surplus we make from this? Trying to,
Yeah, the overall, they had a decent amount of surplus at the close of the year. I don't know if I have that.
like $1 million, it looks like.
The surplus you won't be able to see here. I wish I should have included that. I just included the surplus for the current account. The surplus here was a decent amount because we anticipated a little more this year. So it did close out. A couple of years ago, that surplus was so low, it was scary, I heard. It was like 100,000. I think it's over $1 million
Got
now.
very low during the first year of COVID.
That's exactly right. It's self-liquidating. And that's the key to these utilities.
Right.
I've come from different towns where that's what you always do.
Thank you, Councilor.
Laura, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did have a question. So it was on the previous slide about South Street, because when I'm knocking on doors on South Street, people are asking me about what's going on there. So is that just, you're opening up the road to put new pipes in there?
So it's basically a repaving project, but we
Kind of
did,
like what you did on East Bergen? a couple years ago?
yeah, that was a little more involved because we did utility work there and so I don't know if all of it was planned, but at any rate, this is mostly a repaving job. They are doing ADA compliance at the ramps because when we touch a road, we have to make sure it's ADA compliant. There is a small amount of utility work. We did some surveying of the water line. We did flow test of the water to make sure we had enough pressure there. We did. We scoped the storm sewer and the sanitary sewer. There were some areas that needed upgrades, so we're probably going to line those rather than replace those.
So people seemed a little confused by some of the letters that went out, because some people said they had already put in new water lines, and so they won't be affected by that.
Correct. If you already did a water line, you won't have to end.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, great. That's good. Good to know.
That's a good point, because what happens, what I showed you on the other slide was our general capital, but as the chief said, is that sometimes you have utility work too, and they try to do them both. It makes so
I
much
know when you
sense to
get
do
in
it.
the road, you find a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I found on these programs. It was open for about a year and a half.
To
right?
try to avoid, to try to avoid that this time upfront, we did extra testing. We invested in upfront testing.
Every morning, because I had dirt on my pants when I went to go teach a class, because it took a year and a half to do that, but I understand why that happens. I understand that. Because it's an old town, right?
We're hoping to avoid that with the upfront testing on
Yeah, I
South
think
Street,
that's-
and we're doing the same thing on Mechanic Street.
Because people are asking me about it, yeah.
So if something comes up, that this fund will fund that portion of it. We would have to do another ordinance. There's some older ordinances that have some funds available, which hopefully could cover costs for those projects on South Street and Mechanical also. So our parking utility also rents, it brought in over $2 million last year. We're anticipating a little more this year with all the excess revenues they bring in. And what happens with the surplus is you're having the excess revenues go to surplus, and also the older budgets are dying after 1 year. Every budget has a 2-year life. So after this year, the 22 budget's still active because sometimes bills come in. But after this year, that budget is ended and you cancel that budget, and whatever's left in that budget goes to surplus. And sometimes that could be $800,000 or $900,000. It's not like we over the budget stuff. We just have to anticipate the potential on a lot of costs. So, and it's being consistent. Those budgets are not going up a lot. This budget went up like, $30,000 from last year. This is the parking budget. Actually, I did not add up right there, but from 22. But this year's budget is a little lower than last year. And I think I just put the wrong number here. This should be 7,800 for interest on investments.
Yeah.
So once in a while, my math, I'm usually a numbers guy, but I missed that one. So yeah, future projects, they're doing fine. I know, talking to Bill at the parking, he said that, parking meter and kiosk replacements in the future. And, I don't know, some infrastructure. What's that?
The lights flicked. That's not a good time for a power outage.
Okay, yeah,
Nobody.
not good. Yeah. But the parking utility is very healthy and they're doing fine there. Yes.
The various infrastructure improvements that would be covered.
I think there was some projects that,
So that
Yeah.
could be replacement of kiosks that either go bad or get older, meters, but we just replaced basically every
Right.
meter in town. We did just expand the meter zone, so we would purchase those meters out of that money.
so, right, and it's
So I
probably
see.
redundant. And that possibly could be, it's kind of redundant, but there was some other things they were talking about doing some kind of solar things, but I don't know if that.
Right,
ever-
we didn't actually put that into,
Yeah.
not into this capital
Right.
budget anyway, but when we did the parking lot improvements that are underway right now was a bonded capital improvement through the parking. So that debt service comes out of the parking utility, not out of the general, because it was an investment in parking.
Right, so there was a little project they were doing there, some kind of fixing of the office
Right,
situation.
Right, when we
So-
moved our office over to Riverside Gardens Park.
So
that
I
was
put
capital.
more money in the capital improvement fund here, which this is, I didn't have anything in the past, so I put a little money in there. There's a thing called capital outlay and there's another line item called capital improvement fund. Capital improvement fund has a longer life. You take it in this utility budget and you put it in the capital budget. And if there's a future capital project, that's funded money already. So I try to look ahead to avoid debt if possible without overly, increasing the budget. Right. But there was another 25,000, there's 50 for capital improvement fund and 25,000 for, capital outlay. And they can spend those projects right away from there, no debt. So anytime we can avoid debt without increasing or making a problem for that utility, that's a good thing.
Like, Barbara, did you have a question? I thought. Oh, okay.
All right, so this is where everybody's gonna have questions. So when we do our general budget, we have caps. They call caps, which are limits that you have requirements for the state. We have an appropriation cap, which they say certain costs, meaning mostly salary and wages and all operations that are not debt, not statutory expenditures, you have to meet a certain criteria. Our appropriation cap is fine. We're way under what we could raise but we could go up to a certain limit, but that would raise taxes. We were trying to keep a conservative budget, keeping all the level of services, same level, probably even better. And then there's another cap, it's called a tax levy cap. And it has some prior amount of what we raised last year. This is what we raised last year, and then you have some adjustments and you have some exclusions, and you're allowed to increase, we're allowed to increase by 2% cap. And then we have new ratables from new construction we can add on. And then we have this thing called a cap bank. So last year, when we had this lower amount with the amount that we could have raised, that difference, the state allows you to bank that money. So we use some of that, but we also have another $1 million we could have used, which, yeah, you could use it and raise taxes, but we're not looking to raise taxes. And so at the end of the day, we were $777,000 under the amount that we could have raised in taxes, but we weren't going to go there. That would have been another like 2 or 3%. So we were really conscientious about keeping the tax rate. My philosophy, my father was an auditor for 40 years, steady, not spikes. And I think we were really nicely small increase this year. I think we're doing pretty well. So that's that, Councilman.
Thank you, Tom, for that brilliant presentation. So future planning initiatives. The Finance Committee has talked about, continuing to hold the line on operation expenses. You see that in the last 2 years, we've had a less than 1% municipal tax rate increase. And that's because we really held the line on operating expenses without short-circuiting services in the borough. We want to identify, implement, and invest in productivity enhancements. Better software, better computers, better equipment, trying to find the ways for our employees to be more efficient at the jobs they do. We consider outsourcing opportunities. I know that would scare some employees that my job may go away, but that's not the intent. The intent is to optimize our services that we provide the residents at the lowest cost possible.
Yeah, we'd like an example.
So we've outsourced.
Garbage collection probably in the past. That would be a big one.
Yeah, that's.
Where are you?
These are planning initiatives. We haven't gotten there yet, but again, we're always thinking about our operations and opportunities to increase the efficiency of employees. Yes.
Question.
The Animal Welfare Committee has talked about the waste of money and how expensive we pay in the contract with the SPCA, which is outsourcing. So I think it's actually a con, not a pro with this outsource, because they only came twice in January and twice in February at what was it, like 22,000 a month or some crazy number, I can't think off the top of my head. It's 28,000 for the year divided by 12. And I think you mentioned, Chief, in June or July that you were thinking of reviewing the contract because you weren't getting enough bang for a buck. Since then, have we reviewed the contract? When are we staying with it?
So the SPCA did not change their offer essentially, and there's nobody else. They beat them either.
Nobody else.
There's honestly, there's two choices. You have two organizations that provide the service. They provide slightly different services, and the prices were very close to each other.
And just for information on how much is it, the contract year?
I don't, it's more than 28. I think it's 48.
48.
Yeah.
Yeah, last year
Something like that.
Last year we spent $52,800.
So some of that might be for the
Could be.
PNR program also, because we
Yeah.
do pay for that separately.
Right,
We always have paid for that separately, but I think 48
could be,
is
yeah.
for the contract.
So 48,000 divided by 12, and they came twice in February, twice in March. And to your point, So I guess you gotta be cautious. Outsourcing is not necessarily the
Yeah.
best thing because we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard spot right now.
Right, because the other option is to bring it back in-house. And then there's all the salary implications, benefits, infrastructure that has to come in, and then we have to balance that again. So these initiatives are just that. They require planning. You can't just say, hey, it's costing a lot of money, let's get rid of it, because you don't know what the downward effect is
When you
gonna be.
outsource things,
I'm sorry.
they give, at what point do you outsource things? They give you one price for that year. 'Cause
Right.
I've been around. And then they keep going up. And
Mhm.
then you find your services are going down. Have you, really, that's for real,
Yes.
right? Okay, because I worked in a university, we outsource things. And then you outsource them and they come up with one price and 2 or 3 years later, they're a little bit higher than you thought. You're really not getting the same bang for your buck.
Right.
Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay,
the garbage is a perfect example, you know. It was quoted at one price before I was on the council.
uh-huh.
And that price goes up and up and up every single year. And the services,
Yeah.
not entirely because of Delisa, but, you know, our recycling. At one point, you know, China was taking most of our recycling, so it was easy to get rid of a
Right,
lot of
I
it.
get that.
And,
Yeah.
and now it's not. So all these things, we have to think about future states of the borough and how we can outsource to really support the borough without cutting services too
In
much.
defense of the SPCA, they came and got raccoons out of our patio hearings. We're probably one of those schools there, they got 2 raccoons out of it.
And that number does,
3 AM in the morning.
that number of call-outs does fluctuate. It was really low. I think the most recent one, they came out 8 or 9
I mean,
times
he
in a
came out
month,
pretty
which is
much
still not a
morning, got
huge number,
raccoons
but.
out of They were in my house and back in the patio, didn't get them out, so.
If you had a full-time employee with benefits,
I
it'd
know.
still be more, but
I know,
we want good
I
service though.
it was very-
Right.
I have to say they responded very quickly. The raccoons were running around our house eating, okay.
Yep. Okay.
Outsourcing, are you also looking at the shared services?
Yeah, that was the next bullet point.
Okay,
up
shared
there.
services.
Yeah.
Okay.
Consider evaluating shared services with other borough and county sources. We have, did you go to the slide with the shared services?
No, I have the thing that we share with Shrewsbury Township,
Very good. Share,
the court.
building.
EMS
Yeah.
with, we share fire marshal services with
Right.
Little Silver, and code enforcement, I believe. We do, court and EMS. which is
EMS for
Township.
Shrewsbury Township, yep.
We have the SRO agreement with the Board of Education.
Yes.
Did you do the snow plowing?
Snow plowing.
Snow
with the
plowing, the Board of
Board of Ed?
So.
Yeah.
We do have shared services. We've had most of them for a long time. You know, we've talked about others. Actually, I want to give Tom more work. You know, there are other municipalities who are very, very small and need CFO and accounting services. If Tom has the bandwidth, why not, you know, share him with other towns and bring in that revenue? As long as it doesn't impact the services provided to our residents here first. Okay? And prepare the community for what lies ahead, you know, try to be as transparent and communicative as possible with our budgets and what's going on. And this is part of that process. Let you know what's going on with your taxes, what's going on with your appropriation.
Wait, oh,
Shared services have you ever
There you-
considered?
Oh,
Like outsourced services, presently that is outsourced, but is it in your future planning initiatives, is that something you consider as a shared service?
It was previously a shared service and it didn't work very well for us. We're a little large. Our needs are a little high for another town to take us on. Yeah, we tried it. They did a good job, but our cybersecurity was lacking and this company got us to where we need to go.
Sorry,
I found a calculation error.
another one, you're the calculation.
So I do for a living.
Does it count?
On the public website, part of the disclosure for today, the Borough Red Bank County, that PDF that was on the website is not footing correctly. You're missing a number. After number 4, it's A, B, and C are not subtotaled correctly. But it is correct in the report. You see how that is not adding the C?
yeah. All right.
So can you please fix it and get the correct information? for
Yep,
people?
absolutely.
Yeah.
And, you know, just as Tom pointed out, there was a calculation error on the water and sewer, I believe. No, the parking utility budget.
The prior year, yeah.
And I have another question. If you can go back to like the operating budget where you showed future projects,
Oh,
or even that's fine. So I'm curious, because of the possible change in form of government, and I mean, Kate, you're in the minority, you might not agree with all these priorities, correct? Are we locked into these priorities? So the new government, how much are we locked into?
future, it's a plan.
Right.
This is a capital plan. It could change if we
Okay.
had to do something that's not on our plan and had to be done this year. I can amend the capital budget and we can get it going. As long as we have money to do a down payment, we have a 5% down payment. It's called capital improvement fund. We could do that. So there's a lot of flexibility, but in our budget document, and this will be posted on the website tomorrow, we have a capital plan and it projects these things out over the next 6 years. And it's a plan. So there's a lot of times that things change and come up that you have to take care of.
Right, because I mean, obviously half this year is gonna be under a possible different majority. So this year we're kind of tied into the day-to-day operating costs, but
Right. And
I'm
what
trying
other,
to figure out future planning, what obviously I know.
right. So obviously the council is, or the future council will be tied into any budget projects that have already been passed by this council or prior year council that's running off. So we're locked into those projects that have already been funded. But these future projects are, just like Tom said, plans. There's nothing concrete about them.
No lock
Barbara.
dates or-
Right.
No.
right.
Got it. I know the revenue stream is kind of limited when, other than taxes for a municipality. Has there been discussion on increasing the parking fees? We are the most benevolent town around that has parking fees. I went to lunch in Asbury Park not too long ago, and the fee cost me almost as much to park as it did for lunch.
Right.
And I didn't mind because I wanted to be in Asbury Park. People want to be in Red Bank, and I think that the townspeople complain about the tax, the parking fees,
Mhm.
the visitors don't.
Right.
I would be in favor of looking into increasing the revenue we can get from the parking meters, because I think Long Branch is outrageous. Asbury Park's 24 hours a day. Well, no, it's not at 4 o'clock on the week.
So didn't mean to cut you off, but you may recall that a few years back, we did two things. And this was before I was on council. The first thing was we did raise the rates for the parking meters, and it was a slight raise,
that
but
was like,
and we also expanded the hours so we could collect more revenue. And that was a few years back, but we did get a little pushback from the restaurants, from the downtown, because they feel that it scares off patrons. And we didn't want to do a gigantic increase to be at the level of Long Branch and Asbury, because that kind of shock tends to push people away. But it's certainly something that we can continue to look at. And if this council, future council, whatever, can look at raising those rates. But I would suggest that it not be a huge rate that would scare off customers.
It doesn't scare off people in Asbury and Long Branch, just to say, because I've been there, their places are crowded all the time. And they also have like little things where they stamp your thing and you get a little discount. Go to those towns. No one is scared off by those restaurants,
No, but I'm saying,
just to let you know.
but if Asbury were to say double those parking fees, I think there would be a large pushback from the
So when
community.
we addressed it, I was on the council, so
Uh-huh.
Councilman Ballard was also on the council, and last time we addressed it, is when the hours were extended to 9 o'clock as opposed to 6 o'clock. And that there was a conversation at that time with the executive director of River Center, that is not our current one, about extending those hours and things of that nature. I just discussed this in public recently about revenue streams, and this was one of the ones that I brought up. And I completely agree that it's, when our visitors come to visit the town, that's the way that you thank the residents for hosting you. So I see that as, my way of thanking Asbury Park when I go to visit them.
Yeah.
So, I'm really open to exploring, charging for parking until at least 2 a.m., which is when, the bars close and everybody at that point, usually goes home, have a good night. But yeah, I agree that that's, maybe even not necessarily the fee itself, but the hours being extended.
And
would
hours
impact the
extended,
revenue.
or even restaurants giving like, okay, we'll give you a little bit of a discount,
Yeah.
stamping it.
If I'm
away from my restaurant.
gonna spend $200 for dinner in a restaurant in Red Bank, which doesn't take much more than 2 hamburgers.
Right.
What would be $5 for parking as opposed to $4.50?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
I
that.
go into New York City and I pay $50 for parking and think nothing of it.
And if I remember
Or If I
correctly,
could find a place.
if I remember correctly, the original discussion on extending the hours. Actually, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, we might have talked about midnight.
Yeah.
Or even 10 a.m. and we scaled that back as to not be such a shock. And I could be misremembering, but I kind of remember
We
that.
were in discussion with currently that time with River Center, which is often who we listen to, and I obviously respect their advice immensely always. And at that time, they were really hesitant to go, later than that, but, we're in a new year, a new time, there's a new executive director, there's a lot of other, relationships and things that we've established in the town with those businesses, so, it might be a whole different conversation now.
It really makes sense.
Yeah.
It does.
Ben, you have a question?
Yeah, I did. I didn't catch, what was the surplus from our parking utility? How are we doing?
Oh, very well, because 850,000 went over to current, so I think it's over $1 million still after that, so. Parking,
I'm not anxious to increase the parking because I park downtown.
I thought you walked downtown.
I try, not as much as I used to, getting a little old.
So
Would it be fair to, you just mentioned we had a surplus, right? We all agree there's a healthy surplus in the parking. Would it be fair to put the rest and make the streeteries at the lower cost and then have a discussion in the fall when it's not an election time and everyone's trying to one up each other, to have a true honest conversation in the fall and see if it worked and the cost for us to maintain it or to put the ballers out there, whatever, the cement out there. And then we're also kind of giving an opportunity for the business to take advantage of it and see how the reception of it is post-COVID.
Mhm.
If we have this surplus, why hold on to the surplus? If you're saying you have a good, piggy bank, why not use it and have a really cool discussion once we're not running for office?
Well, I think that's what I've been saying on the minutes, council meetings, but yeah, there's different perspectives on the issue about, what the value is of the treatery, and to me, I saw the value as people are coming to visit the town for these experiences.
Right, but now but in the fall, you'll have numbers too, like true numbers, not. And I think if we all agree that there's a surplus, then to some degree, let's have another test, but then commit to make a decision. And to your point, like we did with the cap thing, maybe put a 2 or 3 year sunset clause in it, because then we can readjust, maybe the costs are different or it's not working. And you don't forget it because you have to address the sunset clause.
Chief, are there any questions online?
Not currently, but if anybody has a question online, just raise your electronic hand or press star 6, 9.
Or not?
Try 6 and 9.
Either one.
One will raise it, one will.
It's not. No question.
Wait, are there any more questions? Yeah, Ben.
All right, so we talked a little bit, you talked earlier about the privatization of garbage pickup.
Mhm.
So how has that changed from when we first started doing? Because I remember there was a fair amount of discussion, passion around that issue at the time. I think when Councilman Goodrich was talking about it. So we kind of, are we happy with what's happening?
If I may, when the council first entertained privatizing trash, they were talking about over $1 million in savings. And in exercising the privatization of trash.
I'm sorry, Councilman, can you stand up?
where's the microphones working?
For the Zoom.
They are, but it's not a Zoom. There you go.
The Zoom thing.
I got a text that they can't hear on Lauren. School me vision.
Is it picking up now?
Fine.
Yeah.
Well, I can't tell, but it should be fine.
I mean, it's blue. Okay. So the anticipated savings was going to be $1 million when we privatized trash. And then after the course of running the first 2 or 3 years, I asked for an analysis, and the ultimate savings was about $100,000. So the $1 million we expected to realize, and I think somebody mentioned it earlier tonight, that and maybe it was you, Laura, that when you negotiate these, and you privatize, you expect to realize these savings, but the costs actually associated with doing the job over the course of time, is not.
So we saved a little money, but not as much as we.
We saved $100,000, $150,000.
That's
Per year, right?
really true about outsourcing a lot of areas, what I've seen in life, that, it looks good at the beginning and then you get into it 2 or 3 years into it. It's not what you thought it was.
You look at the way that the contract was originally written,
Right.
they had to replace some of their equipment in order to meet that contract. Then fuel prices, of course, escalated over the course of the term of the contract. So, yeah, lots can
So,
change.
hey, you disagree with that? Sometimes with outsourcing?
No,
No,
what?
no, okay, so I just.
No, he was thinking a joke.
The
Oh.
total
Yeah.
contract this year is $873,000. So there was
Yeah.
eight workers in the past working with health benefits, with all the equipment and all the fuel costs.
Right.
There's definitely still savings on that.
Still savings. Okay.
Right.
Good to know.
Insurance.
But
Pardon me?
to that point too, Laura, we still have.
Doubt about it.
Because
Oh, yeah.
For,
Oh, yeah.
other refuse pickups.
Right.
So we're still maintaining them
We
and,
still have to maintain that equipment.
right.
So
To stay on the trash situation, at Granville and also at Cedar Crossing. Staying at the same service is one thing, but I don't know if we're getting the best service. So for example, Cedar Crossing, they only fill up the 2 bins and there's too much garbage, so it's overflowing. Same thing at Granville. Once Granville gets filled up, then it's all just outside and the trash, when they come to pick it up, sometimes they don't take all the consumptions that left out there because they're told they can only take X amount. So, and also with recycling, right? Cedar Crossing, a lot of the residents would rather have a bin to throw the recycles out because it kind of looks bad, right? They have those yellow, even though they're free, right? But it looks, the optics of, your garbage piling up next to your door, it's kind of turned off. A lot of residents don't like that there is room in a Cedar Crossing little alcove that's there and centralizing it. And it also helps because when it's piled up, you can't put a lid on. You can't put a lid on, crap goes on the ground, and what's the point of recycling, right? If the goal is to be green, then the idea is to make sure we have the ability to be green.
But Chief,
I can't,
I'm sorry, Michael, but Chief, in the instance of Cedar Crossing, it's a homeowners association that's responsible for their refuse area, right?
Right, yeah.
We're just providing the service to pick that stuff up. So it's not the borough's responsibility to.
But they could put the recycling into the garbage enclosure. Some places do that so that each resident doesn't have to put their recycling out at the curb. They could put recycling bins inside the enclosure next to the dumpster and the provider will pick it up from there.
Well, actually,
So-
that's where communication comes into play, because some residents either told or the belief is X, and you're saying we have an opportunity to make it better. So,
But that's up to the association in that case.
right, but I mean, then.
Because they would have to
tell
permit
residents
I actually addressed.
that You probably know what
I
I'm talking about.
I can't speak to Rambo Towers. I wasn't aware of that situation, but I did have conversations with Ziad when he first got here about the Cedar Crossing situation and their yellow canister that overflowed, and it was a mess. And we talked about expanding the enclosure where their dumpsters were so they could have a recycling dumpster as well. And we talked about that, but it never happened. So they're still in the same situation because after discussing it, nothing ever came of a plan to provide a dumpster.
Responsibility, the homeowner, it's not
It
the
is.
responsibility of anybody but.
It
the
is.
homeowners association.
Correct.
So they're the residents have to go to their homeowners association and complain, not to the borough. It is,
That's
Well,
right.
we tried to accept it because they're residents.
but
Ultimately, it's up
if I
to,
have if I have a problem, like, because I'm a direct resident that's not paying extra for, do they pay, does their homeowners association fee pay for the garbage? Or are they,
Property
Yeah,
taxes,
sure.
well,
pardon?
property taxes.
I know, well, that's like every.
but the borough is collecting it,
Oh,
just like they do
yeah.
for somebody in a single family home, right? Yeah. Well, not the borough, but the borough provider.
Yes, association had to pay for that, the borough, well, whatever. It's-
Ain't that online?
No.
It was,
No, our contractor picks up for the complexes. They don't pick up for the commercial properties like the restaurants and stuff like that.
Okay. So then it's.
Oh, it's really up to the condos. Like behind me, there's some condo associations and they have a big dumpster. So, but our garbage still picks up there.
Yeah.
Their dumpster. Yeah, got it.
It's covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Garbage to grants.
Thank you.
Other questions?
If anybody ever has any other questions, they could always call my office. I'd be happy to answer and get into the other things we haven't covered today. No problem. Appreciate everybody coming out.
Yeah, thank you all for coming out. Thank you for your questions. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone who was online. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thanks.
Very informative.
Thank you.
Okay.